Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fifth Period. This is our first episode of our film appreciation podcast with a bit of a twist to it. I am Mr. Brown, and with me is co-host
Mr. Whittle. So, very excited to be here talking with Mr. Brown about all things cinema. But the name of the game here is to talk about a film that we have watched as part of the Film Appreciation Club at the school we teach at.
Exactly right, yeah. So I'm very, very excited. It's one of my personal favourite films today. But before we get into it, we probably should just give a little bit of an explanation. As Mr. Whittle has said, we are teachers, and so we feel it's necessary to address ourselves by our surname.
Yes, so we thought it'd be a bit of fun to keep it formal, and Mr. Whittle and Mr. Brown. We do have first names, but maybe we'll reveal those at some stage. But
that's something to keep you guessing.
Yes,
you know?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
It's also one of those things where if we do have, a first podcast, so we don't quite know what our potential market will be, but we assume that the majority of our listeners probably will be our students.
Absolutely. We have, this idea has come to mind with the initial target, the primary idea being that we have a conversation around a film that we watch, and yeah, it's for our students. That said, hopefully, it reaches other people as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I personally find that this sort of stuff is really, really interesting in terms of just offering insights, or even when you hear someone else say something that you appreciate about a film and you go, yes, I'm not getting that kind of reception from other people. It's always really interesting to hear different people's perspectives.
For sure. I think some context probably just to help people out with understanding why we're doing what we're doing. As I mentioned, Mr. Brown and I are media teachers at a Victorian school, Victorian government school, but we are also massive film nerds. We've been teaching together for a few years now, and throughout the years, we've just realised that we love having conversations around films. Now, as you'll find out over the podcast, we don't always agree on stuff. We have very different tastes in film.
Absolutely we do, and I did fear revealing early on that we're film enthusiasts and media teachers, because that does come with it a certain expectation that we might know a thing or two about film, but I didn't want to put that out there too early, but the cat is unfortunately out of the bag, so we've got a bit of a role to play today in terms of offering some sort of insight in the film, but I think especially for those who don't necessarily take media, just people who like films in general, it's more of a way to kind of look at it in terms of, oh, that's something I hadn't considered before, rather than an in-depth analysis.
For sure. I have many friends that they're not media teachers, but they still love geeking out on film chats. So I think, and that's the beauty of film, right? As a product, everyone has something that they love about film. So no matter how, it's inevitable that we do get a bit techie sometimes, but I think generally speaking, the conversations we have will be accessible to all in some varying level.
I certainly hope so. I don't think, when we do any sort of analysis into film stuff, no doubt sometimes it can slip into the pretentious zone, but we'll try and avoid that at all costs, especially for our first session for today.
And so we are going to be talking about a film today that was shown yesterday in what has been running for over a year now at our school, the Film Appreciation Club. So a little bit more context, Mr. Brown and I started out the film club at our school last year, and what ended up being was on a Friday at lunchtime, we'd screen the start of a film. Now, the film, due to it being a school, was usually G or PG rated pretty much all the time. But that's not to say that there's not a great array of awesome films that can be displayed when you have that kind of parameter.
Yeah, for sure. And I must say that's very generous of you to suggest that we started the film club up together. That's certainly not the case. Mr. Whittle started the film club up, and I enthusiastically tagged along. Very rarely got an opportunity to sit in the headmaster's chair when Mr. Whittle was absent on a Friday, but it is very much his brainchild with me sort of tagging along. So I'm just really, really excited to be a part of it this year, and it's just so nice to see students who are really, really enthusiastic about something to the point where they know it's not compulsory, but they want to come along anyway and just talk about the films they like, watch a couple of films they like, and just really get kind of involved with other students, not from their own year levels, but across the entire school.
For sure. I think the film club has been representative of how we think film as in general should be accessible, which is however you want to interact with film, go for it. If you are the kind of person that just likes to pick away at a film, pay half attention to it, you can do that at film club. If you're someone who wants to come and have a chat with me and Mr. Brown before or after the film and talk about your favourite thing about it, we're all about that conversation as well. So film's accessible to all, and the film club is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there is a chance that there are listeners to this podcast that attend our school and want to come along to film club but haven't yet made the trip. So
yes.
We probably should give a little bit of a brief rundown of how it operates. So essentially at lunchtimes we come together. We always watch a film, but usually we take a bit of time at the start of film club just to chat to people, get to know their interests. Sometimes we'll do some activities, maybe some film trivia.
Yep.
And then we get to watch at most maybe half an hour of a film.
Yeah. And then so the goal is to set a film that is accessible to students thereafter. So if they choose, they can, after watching the first half an hour with us, go home and watch the rest of the film. And we really hope that some students do take that opportunity, because the films we're selecting, or in fact, sorry, let me correct myself, the films that the students are selecting are, for the most part, I mean, there's always the opinion that comes into play, but for the most part, they're great films.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as you said, there are some parameters in terms of making sure that the films are suitable so that both year 12s and year 7s all the way through can appreciate the film and get involved. You're right, we don't always see eye to eye on what is considered a good film, but I would say that even times that films have been shown where I've been less enthusiastic about coming along, I've always found something to appreciate about it. And I think that's the great thing about reviewing films and rewatching films. The idea that maybe there is something there, even in a film that overall might not be your favourite one, it's always got something positive to look at as well.
Yeah, so that's something that we try when we're having conversations around film as well. Like, you know, there may be a film you bring up that I overarchingly didn't like, but I'll still be able to say I did, however, appreciate this or that about it. So, and that's the beauty of film, right? No one has to like every single film. That we actually shouldn't like every single film. And it gives us an opportunity to talk about, you know, different opinions and what we like and don't like, and be more critical of things. So there's, like, film as an art form is just too much fun in terms of what it gives us. 100%.
And I think probably one of my favourite things about Film Appreciation Club so far are students that do come along to it, not necessarily coming because they really like that film, but coming just because they're looking for a different environment, a safer space, whatever it might be, to just kind of hide out a little bit. And then they realise it's such a nurturing environment. It's got such great kids there that want to chat to them, want to get to know them, and then just by happenstance, they also really engage with the film. So I think probably one of the most rewarding things about it is seeing students who come in that haven't seen a particular film before. It's not really the kind of film that they would usually be drawn to, and then they really get something out of it and are really excited to finish it in their own time.
And also the fact that we open it up to students to put forward a suggestion of a film. Now, like we said, not everyone likes the same films, so when a student puts forward a film suggestion and it's one that we go with, there might be, you know, a couple of other students, or maybe most of the students in that room have seen the film previously, but I bet you not all of them have. So it is always an opportunity for someone to see something new that they may not have otherwise thought of to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. On the note of film choices, I feel like maybe we should get stuck into our text for today.
Yeah.
We are looking at Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is a really nice kind of transition, especially considering how heavily the ideas of school and teachers and all of that sort of stuff kind of feeds into it. I feel like it's a nice smooth transition from the roles that we're in terms of being able to talk about a lot of the content that comes up.
Yeah, so we did kick off 2023 with a film that we selected just because as a starting point, we didn't have any student suggestions. We will obviously endeavour to run on student suggestions hereafter, but when I messaged Mr. Brown and said, this is the one I'm thinking of for our kickoff for the season, let's say, The response from Mr. Brown was one of ecstatic elation.
Oh, yes, great enthusiasm from me. I didn't sleep the entire night beforehand. All my classes for the day went out the window just so that I could be geared up, ready to watch this film.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say that Mr. Brown, and myself, but more so Mr. Brown, is a massive fan of this film.
Yes.
And I think anyone who was in the room with us, which was, by the way, I just want to make a point, we were stoked with the turnout for our first session. We had a classroom that was overfull. We had to go steal chairs from the other room.
We
right?
did.
A bunch of kids there. So, and then when we pressed play, the love for the film it just showed the timelessness of it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I did have to, obviously we only saw the first half an hour of the film, so we ended up watching the film together, which probably won't be a weekly occurrence. I don't think we'll be able to make the time to get together to finish off the film.
Certainly not watching it together, but yeah, so again, putting a bit of structure into what we're endeavouring to do with this podcast, by the time the weekend's finished, Mr. Brown and I will have found opportunities in some way or another to have watched the film, and then we're going to get together and have a chat about it.
But I did have to put a warning in place. It was a similar warning to that I gave on the day we were screening it with the kids. I am so enthusiastic and I know the film so well that I did tend to say quite a lot of the lines along with the characters, which is a very, very annoying habit of mine. I get annoyed when people do it around me, and yet I still can't stop myself from doing it when I'm that enthusiastic about a film.
See, I don't think you should beat yourself up about it too much. I think it shows the passion, and especially when it's a film that the other people have seen before. It makes it a bit more fun when you're seeing the person you're watching it with loving it that much.
Oh, well, that's nice to hear. I appreciate the support on that one too. Alrighty, so Ferris Bueller's Day Off, one of my faves. I feel like we should probably just give a bit of a brief rundown of the plot.
Oh, and before you go ahead, so we should let people know that we have decided that from the outset, whenever we have conversations about a film that we've watched, there will be spoilers in the fact that we're not going to not talk about the whole film. So if you are someone who wants to enjoy the film before hearing us then dissect our point of view on it, you may want to pause the podcast.
Pause the podcast, go and watch it. You won't regret it. It is a great film. And then immediately return to the podcast so that you can appreciate all of the insights that we have on that particular subject.
Yes.
Great. Alrighty. So
I'll let you continue.
Ferris Bueller. It's quite all right. That's an important note to make. So Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Essentially, the film centers around the character of Ferris taking a day off. I know, big twist from the title, but it's a really interesting look at how high school is presented. It's an interesting look at the idea that Ferris is actually graduating high school and looking forward to the future ahead. But I think more than anything, it is a character study. As a John Hughes film, it's often all about the characters and the different dynamics between them, how they're feeling about the lives that they're in. It's very much a coming-of-age film, and between the start of the film and the end of the film, a lot of those characters go on quite a journey in terms of maturing and their outlook on the life that they have.
Yeah, well, we won't dig too much into it on this particular podcast, but for those of you who aren't aware, John Hughes was a bit of an icon of the 80s in terms of making films such as what Mr. Brown just outlined, stories of teenagers kind of coming of age and going through a bit of fun time while they're at it as well. So you may know 16 Candles, you may know Pretty in Pink, Breakfast Club. There was other films he did, of course, but he had a real sweet spot in the middle of the 80s where he was really focusing on this stuff, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off kind of falls into that.
Absolutely, and I think one of the most important things was that he really wanted to show the experience of the teenagers. And I think that very much comes through in this film, especially considering the film is about taking a day off school, and anytime school is actually depicted in the film, it's just about the most boring place you could potentially end up.
Yeah, so I love that you said taking a day off school. So the first thing that comes to mind is just in terms of the overarching story, we experience one single day. Now, Mr. Brown and I have conversations about this on a regular basis where it does that setting, that storyline does allow for this film to be short and sweet. And so the running time is a neat 90-ish minutes, which, we're of the mind that feature lengths most of the time could be approximately that, because those 3-hour, 3.5-hour films, they are tedious half the time, or you'd probably argue more than half the time.
Look, I certainly wouldn't say that they're all tedious. And I'm not even of the mindset that things need to be 90 minutes, but I think there's a very big difference between a film that's 3 hours long and a film that feels 3 hours long. If a film goes for 2.5 hours, but it feels like 90 minutes, then they've done everything right.
Yes.
And all of the elements needed to be in there, and they were all really engaging. But I think often when you do kind of stretch that runtime to 2.5 hours to 3 hours, then sometimes you do watch it, maybe not even on the first viewing, but you go back and you have a look at it and you think, that probably didn't need to be there.
Yeah, so thinking back to Ferris Bueller, like it just focuses on that single day. Very similar to Breakfast Club, where it's just focusing on the single day as well. So John Hughes seems to have a bit of an idea where I just want to tell the story and develop characters within a very limited timeline, and it works really well.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really, really interesting about the film is, even though it is one day, an enormous amount of things happens in that one day. And I think part of that comes down to showing the perspective of Ferris and the idea that he wants to have a really exciting day. And in order to do that, obviously a lot needs to happen. How realistic it would actually be to fit that many things in the day isn't really all that relevant. It's more a metaphor of him kind of exploring life and really getting the most out of that.
Yeah, so I think even with the, if we want to maybe look to start stepping through the film, like the setup, and we talked about the setup being quite cold at the start, that there's no music when we first meet Ferris and his parents in Ferris's bedroom. By the way, I just have to make a note on this. The posters on Ferris's wall. Mr. Brown knows that I'm a big music nerd as well, so there's some very cool bands that John Hughes decked out the bedroom with. But anyway, any music fans out there, maybe look for the Killing Joke poster out there. But yeah, the setup really kind of it immediately goes into that character development of Ferris.
Yeah, 100%. And it is actually really, really interesting that you pointed out the music posters on his wall and all of that sort of stuff, because one of the music posters that actually features on his wall is Simple Minds.
Yes.
So they were the band who did Don't You Forget About Me, which was the iconic song from The Breakfast Club. Now, recently it has had a resurgence with the popularity of the film Pitch Perfect, but that was a reference to
I
The
wouldn't know
Breakfast
about
Club.
that, to be honest. Not dissing Pitch Perfect at all, but it's not one that I've seen.
That surprises me about you. I thought you'd be a big fan of the Pitch Perfect franchise.
But what in terms of that cross reference of the Simple Minds poster into Breakfast Club, that's just one of many things. If you're a hunter of Easter eggs, there's quite a few throughout Ferris Bueller's Day Off that if you know your John Hughes trivia, you will see a raft of stuff pop up.
We won't get into that now because that is a very niche market, people who are interested in that sort of stuff. So let's continue working our way through the film. But one of the things that we did notice, because so much happens in such a short space of time within the film, we noticed even looking back in the earlier sections of the film when he's narrating and just kind of talking about his personal experience and how he feels about school and what he wants to do for the day, we start to see him setting up things that then present themselves later in the film. So one thing in particular that we discussed, later on in the film, there is a very elaborate mechanism that he has rigged up in his room so that when his mum comes in to see if he's sleeping, it looks like he is still sleeping in the bed, but it's just a dummy on a mechanism. And earlier in the film, during one of his kind of piece-to-camera breaking the fourth wall moments, we do see him rigging that up. So just really, really clever storytelling to show things to the audience so that we can kind of get a bit of context, but also it doesn't feel like things are dragging. Everything is very fast-paced and layered.
Yeah, and as we've made it quite clear, Mr. Brown's seen this film probably 300 times. I've seen it quite a few times as well. But we did make the note that for the first-time watcher of a film like this, when you see Ferris doing that, you'd be inquisitive, going, what's he doing? And then the reveal of that later on, you would have had that oh, that's brilliant moment.
We probably should delve a little bit into the idea of him breaking the fourth wall in general.
Yes.
So this is an idea of there being four walls in theatre, and the fourth wall being the metaphorical wall between the performer and the audience. And so the idea of breaking the fourth wall being that they talk directly to the audience. So we see it in film quite a lot these days, but it wasn't nearly as common back then. And so it's a really unique storytelling device where the actor will literally talk to the audience and give them a bit of insight into what they're thinking in their mind.
You will see this used all the time in TV and films that you watch, but I will say if 1986, which is when the film was made, and then from now, this would be one of the best uses of that film device of breaking the fourth wall. The way it's used for narrative purposes, but also for character development, and then there's just the making the audience engagement increase, because there's just those, it's the smaller moments when it occurs where you feel like you're really being brought into the story.
I'm really glad you brought up its use for narrative purposes, because I think one of the best things about it is it doesn't sort of hand feed the audience too much. So the idea in film of showing something, not telling something. So if a character is going to walk through the door, they can walk through the door without saying to the audience, I'm going to walk through this door right now. So not making it too tedious in having a narration that basically says, this is what I'm going to do today, and I'm going through all of the motions. It's more offering additional insights, offering extra information about the character, about his personal preferences, about his friends, his family, how he feels about school, all things that we don't get in the narrative itself, but it's extra little tidbits so that we can kind of feed into his character development.
So I'd just like to point out, probably my favourite use of the fourth wall was when he's in the taxi with Cameron in the back, and he is shocked and appalled that Cameron has, I think he stated by then that he's not having fun for the day, and Ferris is looking at Cameron shocked and appalled, but he then looks to us, the audience, with shock and appall, and as if to say, are you also taken aback by what Cameron has said? So it's just this look at the camera, this tiny little look, and it does so much for the film.
Those fun little moments are everywhere in this film, and so if you do like to go back and you do like to rewatch things, there's so much to appreciate about this film on the second or third watch. Speaking
of Cameron, I wouldn't mind segueing into talking about Cameron a bit. So obviously we have Ferris Bueller, the titular character, is our protagonist, but Cameron arguably has a balance in the story as to his importance. Yeah?
Well, 100%. I think Ferris, he's the leading force in the film, but he doesn't have the strongest narrative arc in the film. I would say that Cameron is the one that kind of matures through the film. He goes from someone who's quite anxious about his life, he doesn't know where he's going, he can't sort of stand up for himself and make his own decisions, to someone who feels really, really confident. Well, not really, really confident, but he's certainly making strides in that way by the end of the film. So while you could argue Ferris remains more or less the same throughout the film, it's his kind of positive influence on Cameron that helps him to mature and get to a stage where he does feel a little bit more confident in himself.
Something that stands out for me with Cameron is how we're introduced to him. And let's go into a bit of nerdery, film nerdery. The juxtaposition between Ferris and Cameron as we're introduced to them. So the whole use of music and the editing and the production design, so the setting's so grey. I'm referring to when Ferris is on the phone to Cameron, trying to encourage him to get out of bed and come over and spend the day with him.
Yeah, so Ferris is literally sitting by his pool. He's got a drink in hand. He's wearing his boardies. He's got his sunglasses on his head, and he's talking about how great the day's going to be. And we can even hear sort of like a luau Hawaiian theme in the background. And then it cuts to Cameron being shot from directly above, a bird's eye kind of shot of him to show just how sunken he is in his bed. His giant covers just sort of keeping him down, and you can hear a very ominous kind of soundtrack in the background.
And the shades are closed, and his bed sheets are grey. Like, everything about when they cut to Cameron, not just his acting and the performance, but also what's happening around him, just screams depression.
For sure, and it everything about it is the polar opposite to what we're getting in the Ferris scene. So the biggest one being obviously both lighting and just color in general. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of really, really bright colors in the pool sequence with Ferris, and then as you said, it cuts to very dull kind of color palettes.
And I think it's a really important setup to really have that juxtaposition in place, because like you said, Cameron's character development is arguably more important than Ferris's by the end of the film. So here we go with spoilers. Like, Cameron comes to a big realization about how he looks at life by the end of the film. So without having it set early on as to what Ferris's differences are to Cameron's, we wouldn't have that growth really kind of as thoroughly demonstrated.
It's worth noting too that we even discussed this a little bit prior to starting today, just the idea that Ferris can at first seem like he's sort of pushing Cameron into things, maybe things that he doesn't necessarily want to do, but if you look at the film as a whole, it's actually quite a positive relationship that he has with him. He sort of teaches him to kind of stand up for himself, and at any moment in the film, Cameron does have the opportunity to say no to Ferris, especially, I mean, the car seems the most obvious choice there. It's in a locked garage. They don't have to actually go and get it, but Cameron still opens it up. He lets Ferris take it out. He jumps in the car. It's all things that he wants to do because he wants to kind of say, yes, I can do this and stand up for myself. But he just needs that extra encouragement with Ferris. So I really think that's an important thing in the film, because you could potentially view Ferris as quite reckless, and I think it's really important to see the positive influence that he has on those around him.
Yeah, we talked about this before, where we all know people that need that little push in life where, yes, we know the reality is that they do like to have fun, they do like to take things lightly sometimes and do something silly for the purposes of just, enjoying life. But they will put on a facade of, no, I have to be serious, or I have to, and so, they need other people to push them. So I think maybe Ferris and Cameron are extreme versions of that, but certainly there is some connection to real life in it.
I really like the fact that you said they're extreme versions too, because we see that in film all the time. Film is not necessarily always going to be the most realistic depiction of the world around us, but what it does is it kind of emphasizes certain ideas, key themes, key characters, so that we can sort of see ourselves in them, but they can get emphasized to the nth degree, so that we can kind of go, oh, that's what it would be like if you pushed it to the farthest. And I find that really interesting in film, because you look at your best qualities, you look at your worst qualities, and you see them in other characters, and it really helps you to connect to those characters. You empathize with them. And if they did it on a more subtle level, then you might not necessarily be able to connect in the same way, because maybe it would fly straight past you, or maybe it just wouldn't elicit as much of an emotional response from you.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked Cameron, we've talked Ferris. For me, there's two other characters that I really think we need to talk about.
Absolutely.
One of them, maybe while we're just thinking about it sequentially, would be maybe Jeannie.
Well, see, it was interesting that you said two other characters, because there's a lot of characters that pop up in this, and I'm sure we'll mention them in passing, but I was wondering which one you thought the two that we should do a dedicated sequence to. So, well, you got Jeannie?
Jeannie would certainly be there for me as well.
Yeah. Oh, she wasn't one of it. So I would rank Jeannie as a higher talking point in terms of the stuff that she goes through in the film than someone like Sloane.
For sure. So we just to contextualize, Jeannie is Ferris's sister, who we meet pretty much in the opening scene, where she's showing her disgust at the fact that her parents are buying the story that Ferris is feeding them about being sick. And Jeannie pops up throughout the film. And then, whereas Sloane is Ferris's girlfriend, who gets released from the school with the how would you describe it? The ploy that
it is. I mean, it's definitely a ploy. I do think they're both important characters. I think Jeannie kind of offers more thematically, but I think Sloane is a really important character too because she's actually in the year level below Ferris. She doesn't necessarily need to take any of the stuff that's happening that day as seriously as, say, someone like Cameron or Ferris. I mean, the film itself, the whole thing is looking at the idea of you're finishing high school and what's next to come. Are we going to continue to live our days in this way, or are we going to kind of step out of our shadow and do something exciting with our lives? And I think that's what it acts as. And so Sloane is kind of that grounding presence where she's along for the ride, but she's got a whole nother year to kind of work her life out. And I think this is why it's such a great choice for us as someone who's surrounded by students all the time. And we often work with sort of senior students who are in that kind of limbo between what am I going to do next? Do I have everything worked out? Do I need to have everything worked out? And so I think this film is really good at saying it's not about what's your life plan, it's about who do you want to be in life. And so for Ferris and Cameron, the reason that they're presented as polar opposites is because they are two very different types of people going into the world, and it's about how are they going to kind of tackle that. And I think the best way that that gets shown throughout the film is the sequence where they're in sort of the high-rise building and they're all leaned against the window and they're looking out at the world ahead of them, and their different reactions to that kind of give you a bit of an insight. Like Sloane is always the character that kind of just rolls with it. She's not taking anything as seriously as the other characters because she's a point of difference. She's someone who's got a bit of time to work that stuff out. But Jeannie, I really want to talk about.
Yeah, so just wrapping up talking about Sloane first, like you got a lot more out of the character of Sloane than I did. Like for me, I think you could have taken Sloane more or less out of the film and most of the film's story would have just been able to be adapted and sit just fine. I think she was, and like, not to be, sexist in any way about it, but in terms of an 86 film, I think she was just an accessory to Ferris. Like, whereas the character of Jeannie, so like segueing into Jeannie, I think Jeannie had a lot more depth as a character, and she's one of two characters has a lesson learned arc as well. Like, so we talked about Cameron before, and for me, Jeannie was the other one.
Yeah, I really like Jeannie's character. It's a really interesting character because she also essentially skips school for the day. We see her early on in the office kind of talking to the character of Grace, and Grace asks her, oh, shouldn't you be in this class right now? And she says, yeah, probably, and then ends up leaving the school. She doesn't go to any of her classes for the day, maybe something off screen early on, but she doesn't appear to be in any of her classes. She leaves school early, she ends up going home, and while everyone is sort of concerned about Ferris, no one cares at all about what Jeannie is doing.
Absolutely.
And she's doing the exact same thing, but no one's hunting her down for it in terms of authority figures, and no one's concerned on the opposite side of it as they are with Ferris missing school in terms of like his parents doting over him, and no one really cares what's going on with Jeannie.
And there's a level of irony there as well, because she is being hypocritical by being critical of Ferris for being sick, but she's taking the day off as well. But then she's getting annoyed at that same hypocrisy being occurring where they're all get well Ferris, whereas they don't care that she is like needing some help or anything like that. So there's kind of layers of irony in terms of what she's experiencing.
Yeah, I like that she does kind of come to terms with that at the end of the film. We are sort of jumping a little bit all over the place with plot here, but I feel like while we're deep diving into her character, or maybe not deep diving, splashing around in the shallows of her character, I think it is really important to mention the fact that later on in the film, when she's introduced to Charlie Sheen's character, a surprise cameo by Charlie Sheen at the police station, and she sort of lays it all out to him and explains why she's angry, and he sort of gives her a who cares response. It's really interesting because you do kind of wonder, well, if she'd taken the entire day off, same as Ferris, if she'd had a different perspective on it, could she have gotten the same amount of enjoyment out of it that Ferris did?
Yeah, so early on while we're watching the film, I wrote the note, what is Jeannie's purpose as a character? What's she giving to the audience? For me, after that scene, and a little bit earlier as well, when she's coming to the realization that you don't have to do the right thing, and the right thing is subjective, and it's it's more about experiencing life to its fullest. Certainly, that scene with Charlie Sheen is the realization for her, but then we have subsequent scenes where it kind of confirms that she has learned that lesson as well, where she helps Ferris at the door with Rooney.
Yeah, and just a note on that mispronunciation of Charlie Sheen as Charlie Sheen. Yeah. I think we should make a note for any future podcast where there's a scene with Charlie Sheen in it. Yeah. It should be a Charlie Sheen.
Yeah, well, you would have seen a Charlie Sheen scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Charlie Sheen could arguably should be seen, not heard. So yeah.
That's very true. Yeah. Well, I agree wholeheartedly that. Upon a first watch, she can sort of be villainized in the film. A lot of people can be villainized in the film, and I think that kind of leads on to what we want to talk about next. And like, whose side should you be on? Who do you get behind? Which characters do you relate to? That kind of thing. And I think that's probably one of the most interesting things about this being our first choice. We're teachers, and we're talking about a film where someone skips school. So I'm really keen to delve into that idea. But I guess the best way to kind of start with that is if you had to consider yourself one of these characters, if you felt like you related to one of these characters more than anyone else in the entire film, who do you think that you would relate to most?
Relate to now as a
in your
school
current
teacher?
In your current form.
Because when I first watched this film, and I won't reveal my age in detail, but I was less than a high school student when I first saw this film. It would be very different to who I'd say I relate to now.
Well, but surely everyone wants to be Ferris, right?
Of course, by default, right? But desire versus relatability are two different things. So I guess I would say, in many ways, I think I relate to Jeannie with her cynicism, but then her realization that life should be kind of fun, and so because I'm constantly going back and forth between that. Like, we should be very serious about things, but then it's like, no, sometimes we should just let things go and we should just have fun. So I'd say Jeannie.
Yeah, and look, that's really interesting too, because when you say, I feel like I see myself in this character, you're not locking yourself into anything. You're not saying that for the rest of your life you have to act like Jeannie. And the reason I was so interested to kind of bring it up is that previously, like, there were certain aspects of characters. Well, as I said, you always idolize Ferris, or you kind of look at Ferris as someone who you're like, oh, I wish someone would compare me to Ferris. And I think all of us have a bit of Ferris in us. But on our most recent watch of the film, I was like, ooh, I'm seeing a lot of myself in Cameron.
Oh, right.
I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I think that for me, a lot of that comes down to just the idea of exhaustion and the idea of let's go do this. Oh, I can't be bothered doing that. I'd rather just stay at home. And I think the reason I connected particularly with Cameron on this watch is that if someone does get me to go out like Ferris does, then I really do enjoy myself and I really appreciate it. So
this would be why you love that car scene so much, right? Because he is torn. So Cameron, for those of you who may have seen the film, there's that scene where he's sitting in the car and he's unsure about whether he goes to Ferris's house or not, and he's talking to himself about it. Ferris actually, funnily, calls out, I bet you that's what he's doing right now.
It's so funny you mentioned that. So I have two notes. You called it in one. Top of my favourite moments was Cameron sitting in his car. But also you mentioned another thing I was going to bring up where the film's transitions between scenes are so brilliant in that they will always get an extra joke in there out of that. And so, yeah, you're right. Ferris calls out. He's probably sitting in his car debating about whether or not to come. And then it cuts immediately to Cameron being like, this is ridiculous. I'll go. It's so good. So good. But yeah, him sitting in the car, I have definitely been on the couch with plans going, do I want to go to these plans or do I want to stay here on the couch? And literally getting up and walking back and forth. Like, it is a perfect depiction of something that I have definitely lived in my life.
Yeah, it's certainly develops the character of Cameron really early on. But like you said, also the fact that Ferris can know that that's what his friend's doing, that's a very subtle kind of development of their friendship as well. Like, you only know your friends that well if they're very strong friendships.
100%, and I think the other really obvious insight we get into how well they know each other is it's another one of my favorite scenes. It's when Cameron is on the phone to Ed Rooney, the principal, and he's pretending to be Sloane's dad. And
Mr. Peterson.
Ferris sort of gives him advice as to what to do. He follows the advice, and then Ferris berates him for it. And we get this great sequence after they're off the phone where he's all insulted that Ferris has hit him or has dismissed his ideas, and then Ferris has to kind of pander to that and say, no, there was good ideas, come on, and reel him back in. And it's really interesting because it's a perfect depiction of a friendship where it's like this sort of thing has happened before and he knows exactly the right thing to say to calm him down and to get him back on board.
It's a beautiful moment. There's many of those throughout the film where Ferris really shows care and affection for Cameron, and Cameron does it in his own way as well. So it's a beautiful friendship that's kind of represented there. Now, there's one character we haven't talked about yet.
I'm so excited.
And the clock is ticking, so we want to make sure we do get around to this. For me, it's such an iconic representation of an antagonist within a school setting film. And the reveal of him. We are talking, of course, of Rooney. What's the first name?
Ed Rooney.
The principal of the school that Ferris assumedly attends on some occasion, although he has had 9 days off this year.
As we're reminded of many times throughout the film.
9 days. Ed Rooney does stand out as a fantastic character within the film.
Oh, 100%. And I think that it's really interesting because he's the only character that works at the school. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said this because Grace is also a very interesting character, but he's the only character, him and Grace, together in the office, are so different to how all the teachers are presented at the school. I think because they're trying to give this really, really mundane depiction of school, every teacher talks in a monotone voice and addresses things like this, and no one's really listening to them. Everyone's half asleep. Even the PE teacher running around the field isn't really paying attention to the kids that are jogging around and they look like they're in physical pain. And so this is the first time we see someone who, at the school, cares about something.
Yes.
And whether they're right to care about it or not is a different matter, but it's the only person working at the school that has passion towards something.
Now, what we found humorous is the level of passion that he feels towards the concern around Ferris being absent yet again. Because the reality is, as school teachers, we could never see our principal spending an entire day getting on the phone just for one student's absences to the point where they're going to go around to their house and solve the case of whether this kid is lying or not.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, never mind how inappropriate it is. Who's got the time for something like that?
That's right. Yeah. So that did stand out as a bit of a laugh. But we get so invested with Rooney as a as a sleuth. Which there's that one scene that when he pulls up in his car and he's going off to, is it an arcade or like a cafe kind of thing?
Some area that he just thinks Ferris will be hanging out in.
Yeah, and he's introduced into that scene as some form of detective. The music really goes in.
It's kind of like a nod to the Peter Gunn theme,
yes.
like the dum 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 da. Yeah.
He's got the sunnies and everything. It's a lot of fun.
It really emphasizes how self-important he feels.
Yes.
Yeah, so he's a really, really interesting character. I love that they early on depict him as someone who's very neat and structured, and even the first time they introduce him, you can see him kind of straightening up his desk and making sure there's no specks of dust and things on it and neatening things. And then by the end of the film, you have this character that's completely disheveled. He's got his pant leg all ripped. He's missing a shoe. He's got blood on his face. Like he's in complete disarray. And so I like that it shows that it almost represents the fact that he's so uptight is not the way to live, and this is almost like the consequence of him being so down the line.
That's a really good point. Like the idea of the consequences of following a life like that, as opposed to embracing the lessons that Ferris is putting out there and that Cameron learns and Jeannie learns, which is that, take life lightly and have fun with it rather than get bogged down on dealing with inane stuff.
That's why the inclusion of Grace is so brilliant, because she's in the exact same office as him, but she doesn't have any of the same worries that he has. Mm-hmm. She's just enjoying life. She's just going with the flow. And you actually told me something really interesting about the character of Grace today in terms of some of her acting in those sequences.
Yeah, so... for those of you who enjoy IMDb, it's a great resource online for film. You have the trivia section. Now, I'm commonly, after a film usually, but sometimes even during a film, heading over to the trivia section of the IMDb website. And what was revealed to us today after watching Ferris Bueller's Day Off is that most of Grace's lines were ad-libbed by the actress who delivered them. So she, for a character that's so fun and says some of the best, arguably the best lines in the film, she made them up on the spot, which is just great. Absolutely great. Just adds another level to my appreciation for that character.
100%. And again, it's probably not an idea that these days is that crazy, but back then that was certainly not a common thing to be doing. So she has some absolute cracker lines, and it's really, really interesting that she's made them up on the spot. Even the time that she answers the phone while Ed's running around and she pretends to be him, she sort of does like a low groan sound, and it's awesome. Like all of that off the top of her head. So that's pretty awesome.
What I love about the Ed character and referring to his neatness and his orderly nature, and then we see his gradual demise throughout the film in terms of his structure and organization, is that the note that I made was that they're relentless with it. They're like, he could have just failed in his goal of getting Ferris found out, but they beat him in terms of the what am I trying to say here? The runaround of the house scene, and then he's with the dog. There's so much that happens to the poor guy.
His character has a lot of passion. Ferris's character has a lot of passion, and again, it's a nice kind of comparison between the two. I mean, Ferris has put so much detail into that day. The more you watch it, the more you realize how elaborate the plan is. I mean, they've got costume changes, they've got pre-rigged phone messages on answering machines and things like that. And so when you think of the amount of trouble that he's gone through for the day, and then the amount of trouble that Ed goes through for that same day trying to just kind of achieve their goals, it's a really interesting comparison between the two of them. They're actually not that dissimilar, they just have a different outlook on it. I feel like Ferris is a really... He's really happy and positive and confident, and Ed is kind of the cynical version of someone with that same sort of drive in life.
Yeah, and looking at what is learned, Ed doesn't learn anything. We see even during the rolling credits, at the end credits, that Ed is, again, Hughes puts Ed, that's John Hughes, the director, decides that they're not going to just leave Ed alone after the final scene of Jeannie throwing his wallet away and towards the dog. During the end credits, as they roll, there is an extra scene that's put into the film where Ed gets picked up by the local school bus and gets a lift home, and he has to go through the embarrassment of all these students seeing the principal of the school basically, just so depleted.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe it's taken us 50 minutes into this podcast to say dee-dee-dom-dom.
We have not done it once.
No, and I acknowledge that it was showing great restraint, but we couldn't let the whole podcast go by without doing it at least once. So.
Well, for a film that is really associated with that song, we made the point that you don't actually hear the song till the end credits, but there is a little snippet of it when they reveal
the car. Yeah. Cool. So I would really love to. I mean, I don't think we should necessarily go on for too long. I don't want to feel like it drags, but there's a couple of points that I would still love to mention about locations in the film. The first one being the city. So when it shows the city for the very first time, I mean, while being accompanied by a soundtrack that's singing City in it, it shows a lot of really, really like great aerial shots of the city. It makes it look so spectacular. And we were actually commenting on how we viewed the city when we were teenagers, how it seemed like such an exciting place. And so to be able to spend the day there instead of being at school was so exciting.
Absolutely. And I think we've been talked about it before, where they fit so much into the day. They do so much within this one day.
Oh, it's exhausting.
Not even a whole day. Like it's really just like a bunch of hours. Like, you know, like if it's the start of a school day towards the end of the school day, it's really like within a 7 to 8 hour period. Arguably, they do so much, and like the city plays a character within the film of offering this to them, and then it kind of adds to the excitement of what they're doing.
Well, that's why I really like that they spend a bit of time actually just showing us aerial shots of the city, because there are things that happen in the day that are not necessarily the most realistic depiction of a day, jumping onto a float and singing Twist and Shout and Dankeschön.
Well, you've never done that before?
No, that's a story for another time, but I think the thing is, it's not necessarily supposed to be like, this is what will happen in your day, but it's showing that for a teenager, just fully living out that day, fully experiencing it, and just getting involved in anything can feel that exciting.
For sure.
And so I feel like the location shots of the city are really, really interesting to be like, well, that's, for a kid, that can be the equivalent of singing on a float. It's that exciting to just spend a day there.
Yep. And I maybe jumping the gun here, but maybe while we're talking about it, I will point out that my favorite moment in the film is the iconic scene of the parade.
Wow.
So there's many scenes throughout the film that stand out, but for that, like, nothing beats it. And like the excitement I felt after having not watched the film for years and years and years, when I knew that scene was around the corner, I'm like, this is fun. This is really fun. This scene that's coming up, and yeah, sure enough, it still stands the test of time.
Oh, 100%. And there's some really fun moments in that scene too. Obviously, before Ferris sings Twist and Shout, iconic moment, he also sings Dankeschön, which is only one of 4 times that characters sing it throughout the film. So Ferris ends up singing it earlier in the shower. Ed Rooney sings it when he comes to visit the house, and we even see hear Jeannie sing it as she's leaving the police station as well. So just kind of those ideas of things that came up earlier in the film, a bit of foreshadowing for what's to come. Speaking of foreshadowing, I am just going to go off on that tangent there. The outfit that Ferris wears when he goes to pick up Sloane from the school is actually seen on the mannequin in his room earlier on in the film. It's a very iconic outfit. We were joking earlier today about how it actually looks like the Inspector Gadget outfit, which coincidentally he starred in the film Inspector Gadget later on. So just another reason why rewatching a film like this is so fun, just to pick up on all those little details that come through.
What else really stands out for you? In terms of location, for sure, I would say the time when they're in the city and they go to the art museum.
100%, yeah.
It's a beautifully shot scene, but there's more to it than just enjoying the scene itself in terms of location.
Well, we were talking earlier about if you were spending a day away from school and you could do anything, where would you go? And trying to think about that for us, but also trying to get in the mindset of a teenager. And we find it really interesting that they do go to the art gallery, because I think, especially these days, that's not necessarily the first place people would think to go.
Not all students, not all teenagers, that's for sure. I'd love to take a poll of our film club students and see how many, if you could do anything you want when you're wagging school, what would you do? And I don't think going to an art museum would be really high up there for the majority of students. But I think in terms of being used within the plot, it's more to expand upon how much stuff that they do. There's so much that they experience, including that.
And I think it says a lot about their characters too when they're there. I mean, I love that the way that we're sort of introduced to it is that we see a bunch of sort of kindergarten or primary school kids walking through, and they're just part of that chain. Like, really just the idea that they're just big kids.
Yep.
But I feel like it really like contrast that by showing them as big kids and then instantly flips to showing how mature they are after that, with Cameron looking at a picture and kind of seeing himself in the picture, and also Ferris and Sloane in sort of a romantic environment and their love kind of blossoming. And the idea of them being big kids being contrasted with them being adults is kind of what the film is all about. They're in that pivotal point in life where they're moving from one area of their life to the next. So to see that play out in such a short space of time is a really cool idea.
And I think there's moments throughout the film where, like you said, you appreciate when a filmmaker doesn't just spoon feed the audience. Like they use the film well to develop ideas and develop characters without like overtly telling us this is what Cameron's feeling right now. So if you actually watch that sequence between Cameron and the painting, like the back and forth of the close-ups, like it does, no words are said within that sequence, but it tells us a lot about how Cameron's feeling at that point.
Yeah, I guess for me, that's probably, in terms of the film's content, I mean, I would love to delve into one or two more favourite moments of yours. If there are any that in particular stand out for you.
Yeah, so going a bit more formal with listing out our favourite moments. Like I said, the one that at the parade really does stand out for me. I like the transition from Dankeschön to Twist and Shout as well, because it is two songs where they're serving different purposes. One's trying to reel Cameron back into finding Ferris endearing, and then the next one's just party mode all the way.
I love that we actually do cut to Sloane and Cameron dancing to Twist and Shout. It's kind of like finally he's having a bit more fun with it. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. My favourite moments, besides the ones that we've mentioned, come down to the phone calls. So when Cameron obviously calls Ed, which we talked about earlier, and puts on the voice, and it builds a lot of suspense in terms of we don't necessarily know what's happening. We kind of find out the information the same way that Ed does. He originally thinks Ferris is calling him, and then it turns out to be Cameron, and that reveal is very, very funny. But later on, when we're in the restaurant and Ferris pretends to be Abe Froman, Sausage King of Chicago, and they do the sort of elaborate plan where he pretends he's on the phone to the police, and then he gets described on the phone, and Cameron pretends to be the police sergeant. It's a fun callback to what's happened previously. They don't need to give us the same amount of information they did.
While we're talking about that scene as well, like just as a very small character within the film, I love that maitre d'. Like his snootiness, and that mustache and the hair and the
little pencil mustache.
He's a great character. He's only in it for like 3 to 5 minutes.
But they all are great characters. We spoke about some in more depth, but his parents, they were a couple in real life.
Oh right,
yeah.
But there's a few couples in the film in real life.
Oh yes, we were talking about the fact that Ferris and Jeannie, the character of his sister, the actors Matthew Broderick and Jennifer Grey, were actually a couple in real life, which is really interesting. I mean, you don't see that a lot. I know Dexter did it too, between Dexter and Deb, his sister. Yes. They were a couple in real life, but yeah, that's an interesting little tidbit there.
I guess we should kind of look to start summing up our overall views on this film. For me, maybe talking about who your best on ground is, who your favourite character was. I would probably, even though I did connect the most with Jeannie, I would probably go with Cameron. I just like him as a character, what he does, how he grows, like his all the different things that he goes through in the film. I'd say Cameron's my favourite character.
Yeah, and a very worthy choice. I'm a little disappointed with my own choice because it does seem so obvious to say that Ferris is my favourite character. It's the equivalent to saying, what Harry Potter house are you in? Oh, Gryffindor. Gryffindor all the way. But no, I think the thing that I really like about Ferris is how he can kind of elicit responses from people, and he is this positive driving force the entire time. Even when his back is kind of against the wall at certain points in the film, he always maintained a positive attitude, which I think we could all stand to do a little bit more in life as well. But also it comes down to the fact that I watched this film at a very young age. I have a lot of nostalgia for the film. I think as a kid I sort of idealized Ferris Bueller, which can seem a little bit silly when you go, oh, you idolize someone that skips school. And it's like, well, no, I'm not condoning skipping school. I'm idealizing someone who is always trying to get the most out of their life. And I think that's a really positive message to be putting forward. So
with that in mind, like a film that is, if I've got the math correct on this, 37 years old, 1986. So yeah, 37 sounds about right. For a film that's 37 years old, has it aged well? Is it a film that when you go back to it now, you don't cringe at all? You still get the same or a different or more or less value from?
Yeah, and I mean, that comes down to strong characters across the board as well. Some characters are less grounded or more of a kind of stereotypical depiction of characters as opposed to a realistic depiction of them. Like you spoke about earlier, the idea of characters just kind of being props for other characters to kind of feed off in the scene. So I think it is really, really interesting. Personally, I think it has aged well because it comes down to the message that it's putting forward. And I think that while that message can be hiding under the veil of skipping school is always a good idea, for me, more than anything, it's trying to get the most out of life is always a good idea. And I think that that's a really positive thing to take forward.
Yep, so absolutely thematically, I think it's got a great little message in there that's a lot of fun if you look at it correctly. But as a film as well, the pace of editing, the characters, the way it's all unfolds, it's really neat and it's a lot of fun. Like I don't feel like there's any moment that's dull in nature. I think that it's just constantly got the right energy, the momentum's there. So for me, I think it's aged extremely well. I think it's a great film still.
There's also a very big difference between has it aged well and do you think it's a realistic depiction of kind of the world? And I think even back then when it was released, it wasn't a realistic depiction of what a principal would do, what a student would do, what parents would do. But it all acted as a metaphor, and I think the metaphor that it did act as is still very prevalent today.
So I reckon that's a pretty good spot to leave our chat about the film.
Yeah, I guess the one thing we do want to kind of end with is that this is our first episode. I'm very new to the podcast game. Mr. Whittle has done a podcast before, but
only a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I'm very much just dipping my toe in the water here. So we're finding our feet a little bit. We don't quite know going forward what kind of format it would take. Obviously, we will devote a large portion of this to talking about the film that we've watched in Film Appreciation Club the week before. But I think we're always kind of looking for tips, tricks, ways that we could kind of improve it. I think for me, I would love to have different segments, potentially answering questions that people have put forward. Like whatever people think would be engaging or whatever you'd like to see there.
Yeah, we are really endeavouring to make this a podcast where you feel like you're joining in on the conversations we love having around a film. And so we'd like to hear from you guys as to what you think would be a good way to kind of format the podcast so that you are enjoying it to the highest level possible.
And as always, for people who are coming along every week, we are always looking for suggestions for new films to be watching in Film Club as well.
Yeah, so you should know that that's on the Google Classroom, etc. But you can come and talk to us about it as well. Even if you just want to say, Mr. Brown or Mr. Whittle, do you have a film this week? Well, I'd love to watch this film. You're most likely going to get a thumbs up from us. So we just would love to hear from you in any which way. We're all about hearing from people and their film passion.
Yeah, and if you're not part of Film Appreciation Club and you are listening, please don't feel like you're not involved. You can absolutely suggest films for us to watch. You won't be there on the day when we're watching them, but you can still appreciate us talking back about all of the key moments and things that we loved about the film too.
For sure.
Great. Well, thanks very much, guys.
Dankeschön, everyone.
Darling, Dankeschön. Remember to like and subscribe, guys, to stay up to date for future releases, and we will see you all next week.